I think if seriously, if I said I would like to be seen as being someone who could continue to try to make a difference, I think that would be a very satisfying thing for me to achieve. The greatest pleasure I've had is trying to do something that everybody says could not be done. I decided that India could produce its own car. Everybody, my friends overseas in the automobile business, said that this couldn't be done. We had to go through a collaboration to get know-how, get technology. But we undertook to produce this car. You saw images of it in the video. It was called the Indica, and we produced it in India, totally of Indian content. As we got close to putting it in the market, my friends in India somewhat distanced themselves from me, otherwise known as distancing yourself from failure. And when the car came out, I suddenly felt that I didn't have a friend in the world, and that all the warnings that people had given me were probably going to come true. But the car did come out, it did earn a 20% market share, and we showed that we could do something.
How did you go about establishing your credibility as a leader in those early days?
I had two problems. One were the actual market problems of a large business house that had operated very traditionally, and the other was internal to the company of several titans, if you might, who didn't want any change to take place, and I guess a certain amount of resentment also. So the first 5 years were akin to a Clint Eastwood, if you might, which tended to be filled with trying to get these elderly, very prominent people out of the way. It was not done with bullets, it was done with persuasion and I'm sorry to say, with money. So the first 5 years were spent in creating an environment where change was possible. And then I've been blessed with an organization that has been displaying considerable spirit in wanting to make a change. And many things that we did had not been done before, but I was always pleased to see that the response from the organization was tremendous. Without that, it could not have been done.
And you know, again, metaphorically, you always are told that you are having to fit yourself in your predecessor's shoes. And these were mighty big shoes to fit. And so I decided to embark on a path of just being myself. And you know, humorously, I must tell you that I went through, that confusion wasn't only in my mind, because Jay never left the office. And my greatest concern was, you know, how will I operate with Jay beside me or behind me or whatever. He sat on all the boards that he had sat on, but now no longer is chairman. And very often when he walked into the boardroom, he would sit in the chairman's chair. And then 5 minutes later, he'd say, "Oh, I shouldn't have been here." And then you'd play musical chairs in the boardroom. So in many ways, there was, almost public confusion. But if I had any reservations, they were dispelled, because Jay was, in the 2 years that he was there, was a wonderful mentor. He never interfered. He supported.
How did you get comfortable making such consequential decisions and, to your point, convincing others to follow you into them?
I think convincing myself that it would work is a judgment call in terms of the faith you put in your people to do this. And case in point was on the Indica. Conventional wisdom said that you couldn't enter the car business without having a collaboration, and certainly to think of designing a car domestically and producing it was an unheard of thing. My friends, as we launched the car, started to distance themselves from me.
Right.
And it wasn't for me, it was to distance themselves from failure.
Right.
And it was the trust one had in the young team to put this together that drove it. The other is that from time to time, I think change has caused a lot of people in the company to question the wisdom that such a change would be based on.
Right.
And I've been lucky, and in some cases it's been difficult, but by and large, India's a country that has such a great potential that change is by and large well received.
Right.
When we wanted to form an airline, oddly enough, we were asked to form an airline by the then Prime Minister. But vested interests made sure that we didn't form an airline through three successive Prime Ministers. And that was the most visible of the thing, which we walked away from because we could have probably had it by succumbing to subjective issues of bribery or corruption, and we walked away from it.
Right.
Well, airline would have been something we really wanted to do. We pioneered aviation in the turn of the century.
Right.
And it was emotionally something that we would have liked very much to be in again.
Right.
The worst thing that can happen is to determine where the company is going through the eyes or the mouth of one person, i.e. the CEO.
Right.
Far more is gained by walking on the shop floor and talking to the people and trying to communicate. One of my weaknesses has been, I think, I've never communicated enough or adequately with our people, partly because I'm a shy person, and secondly, because I didn't realize the importance of communication. But I think communication with the employees is an exceedingly important function that any company chairman has to do and be visible in that sense. You've got a country with tremendous disparity of income. You've got very rich people on the one hand and abject poverty on the other. You have to be sensitive to the fact that this gap cannot continue to widen while there's a large discontented number of people who are looking at the inequities of the environment as they see it. For companies, therefore, I think there has to be a sensitivity to doing something in in the communities around which you operate, and making an effort to raise the quality of life so that there's not envy and distaste for what was there, but the company's looked at in a more positive sense in enhancing the quality of life of the people around them. We expend about 4% of our net profit in these rural development activities, and we do it ourselves. And someone may argue that this is shareholders' money, which it is, but I think it has brought a sense of not just tolerance, but a sense of welcoming our companies in wherever they've been, and enhancing whatever we've been trying to do in the product area or the services area to a community area, being part of the community. I think if I said I would like to be seen as being someone who could continue to try to make a difference, I think that would be a very satisfying thing for me to achieve. So I think there's a need for a supporting environment to take place, but I would hope that we would see more and more local companies being entrepreneurial and creative and being at some stage a global player. I think large business has to have an element of orienting themselves to serve a social need also, in addition to just serving a business need. And in our case, I think we may be driven by a business motivation, but we should always be conscious of areas that we feel are not in the public interest. We withdrew from activities in the liquor business because we felt that this was an area that tended to be serving a consumer base that perhaps we didn't want to be in.